Hey there, I'm Destiny Chase, and this is my rendition of my MA final project. Thank you so much for joining me for this last journey, and here it is on Chasing Connections. Looking under a microscope here, we will be traveling from segment 1, imagine, to define the problem. Segment or section 2 will be plan our path to opportunity. Segment 3 will be create, where I will showcase the product. And finally, the last segment will be sharing some of what I was able to come up with in this time frame and what will continue on even after this chapter is closed. First, let's stop to sample the problems and imagine what could be built from our current foundation. We have a wake of major climate concerns due to increased human impacts on the planet rippling around us. In 2023, Yale conducted a study. 61% of Americans surveyed were aware of global warming and its impacts on humans, and 37% of those felt very worried about it. Currently, only 75% of US schools are teaching about the realities of our current climate crisis. There is more correlating data to back up the severity that human impacts are having on planetary boundaries and global human health than ever before. Climate related weather disasters are a major component becoming more and more prevalent in our everyday lives, especially those residing in the more vulnerable communities. From 1980 to 2000, the average severe weather related impacts costing $1 billion for remediation efforts was 3.5 events annually. From 2018 to 2022, these billion-dollar events increased to 17.8 events annually. Scientific evidence from leading organizations like IPCC and NOAA confirms that climate change is increasing in frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as heat waves, droughts, floods, and even wildfires. These events pose significant risk to human health, infrastructure, economies, and their impacts are projected to worsen in the coming decades. Along with natural hazards, we have many man made disasters looming as well. For example, mass consumerism, reliance on single use items, and convenience are fueling a plastic pollution crisis with consequences to human and environmental health. Landfills are overflowing with millions of tons of plastic waste each year. Our oceans are choked with plastic debris, and microplastics are infiltrating the food chain, posing potential risks to all living things. These trends, along with the recent alarming discovery of microplastics in human cadavers, illuminates the urgent need to address plastics as a growing threat to our society and beyond. Due to our currently trending consumerist society in which we've deemed normal, this has led to extended and unforeseen impacts. One example of this is through the hidden dangers we wear on our body. 60% of all clothing made today is woven together by polyester fibers. Polyester is derived from PET or polyethylene terephthalate, which is a polymer or plastic most of us have heard of and use products made from daily. This fiber tends to shed microplastics when washed and worn. These microplastics can leach into our skin and become trapped in various organs such as the bloodstream and even the brain. This infiltration can put a strain on natural processes and lead to increased risk of cardiovascular impacts and other negative health related triggers. These are just some of the issues that our global society is facing. And if these issues are so connected to our health and well being, then why aren't we talking about it? And even bigger, how can we build more resilient communities in the wake of these realities without enticing fear or provoking even more anxiety than our global population is already experiencing? These, these questions lead us into my plan for opportunity. In a world facing unprecedented environmental challenges, this project seeks to bridge the gap between awareness and action by developing a podcast that explores the interconnectedness of environmental and human health. I aim to spark meaningful conversations and inspire positive change. Podcasts are popular. 100 million Americans listen to at least one podcast each week, accounting for 34% of Americans aged 12 and up. There's been significant growth in podcast production and listening, with 115% growth from 2020 to 2022. Obviously, COVID had a hand in that. However, results have shown that people may have left behind their mass toilet paper purchasing, but they did not leave behind listening to podcasts, okay? In fact, listening rates have continued to rise. There's been a 26% year-to-year growth in monetization through ad revenue, which reached a $1.8 billion industry in 2022. And speaking of ad revenue, this had me investigate 17 total pathways for sponsoring collaborations that fall in line with our sustainable values. I conducted further research in competitive analysis, and I looked first at what other successful podcasts might be out there discussing these type of topics on air. I reviewed nearly 40 podcasts and narrowed it down to these six to conduct a strategy canvas on particular elements to include topic similarities, style, voice, length, and whether or not they were utilizing monetization through ad revenue. I then cross reference what do we have to offer that they don't? What is our niche audience? And so on. Despite there being a few great podcasts out there already covering many similar topics, none of these come with the same background, expertise, and radiant personalities as our marriage duo does. So, who are the hosts? The hosts of this podcast include myself and my husband, giving us a spicy edge by including some of our typical marriage banter. Additionally, we leverage our expertise in military resilience, health sciences, and environmental sciences to explore the link between human and planetary health in our daily lives, while living the sustainable and actionable guidance that we'll instill in our episodes. So now that we have our niche audience targeted with content to pair, I needed a bit more hands on experience for recording and producing a podcast. So I looked into LinkedIn Learning for some continued education, which included extensive research on things like platforms, DAWs, and equipment. Here's an overview of those learnings. My secondary research led me here, so this is where I sought the most boiled down version of steps required for successful podcast production. Because you see, producing a quality podcast involves careful planning, investing in good equipment, mastering and recording and editing techniques, and also actively promoting your show to reach your target audience. I had the opportunity to conduct 3 expert interviews with podcasters of past, present, and future, all from various backgrounds and media with differing experiences in podcasting. They all come from several different countries and have differing niche listeners. The podcast in question I had the opportunity to interview with were a host from Redacted, a podcast focusing on industrial design recorded out of Australia, the host of Paranormal Lounge, a podcast and media guru involving all things paranormal and strange out of California, and finally, the podcast host of Expedition History. This was a podcast that went on for about a year and a half during COVID that the host recorded out of Poland and Romania. And then the blue titles can actually be clicked on to take you to their host websites for more information. The key takeaways from these interviews prepared me for the following realities. Nobody knows what they're doing until they know what they're doing. Just like in a distillery, things often get better with time. The importance of growing as you go and using all resources possible to help in the diffusion of this innovation. And finally, focusing on scalability and understanding that I must meet my listeners where they are while doing my best to entwine with the algorithm. I conducted a survey to find out more on American listening habits, which received 63 responses. To highlight some learnings from that, 88.9%, so nearly 89% of respondents listen to podcasts, 69.8 or nearly 70% listen twice a month or more, and nearly 97% listen for 30 minutes or longer. Approximately 63.5% of survey respondents listen to podcasts primarily on Spotify. And finally, for the last bit of planning phase, I invested in some pretty high quality recording equipment to ensure the podcast has professional sound quality. This included carefully researching and selecting our microphone, headphones, and audio interfaces in order to optimize recording, mixing, and mastering. This is the mic that we selected, the Rode mic. It's fantastic. I also purchased a new iMac to ensure ease of platform since we selected GarageBand as our digital audio workstation, or our DAW. And here are the headphones, which are a bit older but work really well when using an audio input jack. And with all these components gathered, our SEO and best practices analyzed, along with competition and the needs of our target audience identified, we've really been able to envision the future. And this future includes the following listener persona, who encapsulates the essence of a community we're trying to address. Meet Charlie. He's an avid listener of the show. He enjoys sending in stories of resilience to the pod that he comes across. He's 28 years old, so very among the millennial population that we're appealing to, an avid plant dad and concerned citizen regarding the current climate crisis. He often feels overwhelmed by the extent of it, sometimes unable to delineate between what's truth and myth due to misinformation spewed in media outlets. He's a full-time graphic designer and believes that small changes can make big impacts. So, for Charlie and all the other concerned citizens who are unafraid to learn about the wicked problems and address them head on, here's what I've been able to create on this timeline. I set out to create a podcast exploring the interconnectedness of human and environmental health. This is for listeners interested in positively impacting and building healthier, more resilient global communities in order to bring awareness and empower listeners. I applied our concept to create a sustainable SWOT analysis that would help us further define our goals. Here are the 2 SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, that we hope to achieve through producing this podcast: 3, good health and well-being, and 13, climate action. And now, without further ado, I present to you our podcast, Chasing Resiliency. You can check out our website by clicking the link here, heading over to www.chasingresiliency.com. You'll find information into our social media and our host backgrounds, along with our release date set for New Year's. If you head over to Instagram, you can find us at Chasing Resiliency, where we've started posting to introduce ourselves and the content that we'll be putting out. You can access our Linktree by visiting our Instagram account or going to Linktree/Chasing Resiliency. We've also got our RSS feeds situated on SoundCloud and have links to that as well. And for our final segment, here's a look and listen into our lives and this project of developing and producing a podcast ready for air. Hey guys, we're Destiny and Brandon Chase, and we're so excited to be sharing our new podcast, Chasing Resiliency, with you. We've spent the last year pouring our hearts and really our souls into this podcast and experience to explore the fascinating connections between environmental and human health and well-being.
And yeah, so we're going to be diving into topics like circadian rhythms, microplastic, those sneaky chemicals that lurk in our food and our clothing,
along with strength training, natural disaster preparedness, and of course, building resiliency in all aspects of our lives.
We'll bring you expert interviews, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and live a more sustainable life.
We believe that prevention's the key and that you shouldn't have to wait till you're sick to get healthy.
Chasing Resiliency launches on Spotify on New Year's Day 2025 with new episodes every other Wednesday.
So join us on this journey to a healthier, more resilient you and a healthier planet, and stay tuned for Chasing Resiliency. Ever feel like the world is throwing everything it's got at you?
You know, like wildfires, hurricanes, toxins in our food, water, soil, and the list goes on.
Have you ever felt health conscious or maybe eco-conscious in the wake of human impacts?
We want you to know that you're not alone.
And what if we told you that there's a way to not just survive, but thrive in this ever-changing environment?
Hi, we're Brandon.
And Destiny Chase. Welcome to Chasing Resiliency. With a diverse background in the wheelhouse of survival, we're bringing curated scientific stories for your listening pleasure. My background is as an environmental and chemical scientist.
I'm a doctor of physical therapy. We're both former military, so we know a thing or two about facing challenges head on.
We're passionate about exploring the connections between human health and the environment, and we're here to give you the no-shit advice on how to build resiliency in a world that's constantly changing. For us, resiliency means being able to bounce back from setbacks, adapt to change, and thrive in the face of adversity. It's about taking care of ourselves, our communities, and our planet.
What makes this podcast different? Well, it's probably the only place you'll find an environmental scientist and a physical therapist discussing some of these pressing issues together, with a healthy dose of humor and life experience.
We've been through it all, from surviving military operations, natural disasters, and some. We're not afraid to share our stories, the good, the bad, and sometimes hilarious.
Now, before we dive in, a quick but important note. The information provided in this podcast is for general knowledge, informational, and engagement purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. It is essential to consult with your doctor or other qualified healthcare provider regarding any health concerns or before making any decisions related to your health or treatment. Remember, every individual is different, and what works for one person may not work for another. Always seek personalized advice from your healthcare provider. The hosts and producers of this podcast are not liable for any actions taken by listeners based on the information provided.
Ready to start chasing resiliency? Hit that subscribe button or visit our website at chasingresiliency.com for more information. All resources can be found in the show notes. Email us your very own stories of resiliency. or follow along on Instagram at Chasing Resiliency. Stay tuned. We're coming to Spotify on January 1st, 2025. Get ready to start chasing resiliency.